we will be doing our next presentation, which is, I will just share in a moment. Sorry. Okay, well, we will be starting in a moment with Carla Van Steenberg, who will be giving a presentation on building a staff team of non-tech professionals in a tech company. I will just invite Carla onto the screen, onto the stage.
Hi there. Good afternoon.
Hello. Well, I'll leave you to it then. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you. Good morning, afternoon, evening. I don't know. We're not that many. We're only 12, so that gives us a nice and cozy half hour for me to share with you a few thoughts on effectively how to build a staff team of non-tech professionals in a tech company. Allow me to share my screen. Do let me know if you can't see it. Trying to switch to presentation mode here. There we are. Okay, very well. So maybe short introduction. I'm Carla. I started working for Materialize in 2003. That's almost 2 decades ago. That also has given me a possibility in my career to really start a team from scratch. When I joined in 2003, I was the first in-house counsel for Materialize. There were no legal people at the company working at that time. In the meantime, there is a department. There is a group of people that, and together we can call them a department. And there is, I think, a high degree of similarity, whether you are a member of a legal team in a company or a member of the finance team, the HR team, the IT team, or the marketing team. I think that there is a few common denominators that you can draw and you can see in how you do your work, the challenges that you face in doing it, and from the management perspective, from those who lead such teams, there is, I think, a few topics, a few thoughts that I can share with you based on my very own personal experience, because that is really what this talk is all about. There is no underlying big scientific principles. I have studied law and only law at university, so there is no additional scientific insights that I will be sharing. This is all work-based experience. Key points that I want to talk about today are the following ones. I think that if you talk about and think about a team in a company, and especially when that team is a staff team, that you have to think about it from an angle that the team is more than the people. I'll go and explain that. A second big thing is that there is a lot of ignorance that the members of your team are going to have on all of the things that are ongoing on the business side, because the business inherently is driven by certain technology, and it will be more frequent than not that your team members are not highly acquainted with or educated in the topic of the technology. I think that in hiring people and in keeping them on board, it is very important to look for and stimulate curiosity, and at the same time also to encourage your team members to build a network that goes far beyond and above the limitations of the group of professionals that are working on the staff specialization. So the lawyers in the company should know many more people outside of the legal team than within the legal team, because that is ultimately what is going to help them to do a better job. A staff role, whether it's in legal or in finance or in HR, is always about finding balances, because there is some intrinsic contradiction in the things that we have to do. I'll talk about that a bit. And then another thing is the mantra that I continuously apply when I'm doing my job, when I'm coaching the members of my team, is that we're all in sales. There is no such thing as people who are blocking sales because we're all in sales. Any people's salary is paid from the turnover we generate on the basis of the sales that we do. So all of us are aligned and all of us are motivated by ultimately the same thing, and that is that we're all in sales. The last thing that I want to talk about is the importance of making sure that as a team manager, you dedicate sufficient attention to working on the career path of your team members and how, from a staff department, that sometimes is difficult. First of all, talking about the legal team at Materialize, there's my team members are 5 business support lawyers, 2 IP officers, and 2 paralegal, 2 persons who fulfill a paralegal role. Now, I think it's very important when I think about resources available that I do not only think about the people in my group, because there is 2 additional sources of the work to being done, and that is on the one hand tools that we have available, software tools that we have available. On the other hand, there is of course the help of external counsel and your legal force in a company, but also for other staff units. I think this is true. The force of your department is more than the sum of the individuals that are a member of your department. You also need to think about if there is an overload of work and I need to increase the resources that I have available. Should I necessarily think about expanding the team? Or could I think of maybe looking at automation of certain processes? Would it not be wiser, instead of hiring yet another paralegal to review confidentiality agreements, would it not be wiser to look at how can we automate or make more efficient, make less time intensive the process of reviewing confidentiality agreements? So within Materialize, what we have is we have certain tools available and we're far away from being ready, but there is tools that support us in keeping a repository of all of the contracts. There is a tool, and it has been externally bought. There is a tool that helps us in management of all of the stock options plans and the warrant plans that we have, because keeping track of that on the basis of a simple Excel sheet at a certain point in time, we saw that that was simply not sufficient, and that in order to adjust our way of working, it was much better to pay a license fee to a company that has solutions in place for this part of our job. On we as a listed company, we're listed on Nasdaq. There is certain SEC reporting that we have to do. Also there, when first off we start with simply in a Word document write what we had to write and include in our report. We soon found that there was technical solutions available, and those are not very fancy ones, that helped us in simply reducing the hours of work that we had to put in there by identifying and really making very clear which sections required annual updating, number sections, or simply also legal aspects that needed to be updated. And these are all examples of how you can, to some extent, work on management of your resources in another way than simply adding people to your workforce. A third source of resources is external counsel. It is very much needed if you think from a management point of view. It is very much needed that you acknowledge that it doesn't make sense. It simply doesn't make sense to try and know everything. Let me give you an example. In the past couple of years, we've seen an increasing importance attached to data protection law. And we've seen the entry into force in Europe of the Gdpr. That's maybe an acronym that most of you are familiar with. Well, GDPR is fine. I mean, as a European company, we have our headquarters in Belgium. It is possible for us to check whether GDPR what's in there and how we can implement it and make sure that there is compliance. But then we hear about data protection legislation being approved in Japan, and then about it being approved in China or in Brazil. And then it really becomes a challenge because you simply cannot, with Belgian law trained people, you cannot have the confidence that you will be able to also expand your compliance program on data protection with all of these national legislations. So those are the moments where you have to acknowledge that now it's time and it's wise to go and seek outside help. And those outside helpers will be key into helping you build the staff team that you need that can tackle all of the questions that come your way. So, first point, when building a team, make sure you think of more than just individuals and adding individuals to the team. Second thing, there's a whole lot of things that the members in your staff team will know nothing about. We work within the company, we are a minority. As legal people, we are very much not what the typical profile is for someone who works at Materialize. Those people will typically be engineers, um, computer and software experts, people who have a hard skills, technical background. Those are the vast majority of our workforce. That means that there is an enormous gap in the knowledge that we have versus all of the things that these engineers know. Now, that is sometimes very annoying because you can sit in meetings and try and add value while sitting in a meeting feeling desperate and feeling insecure because there's a whole part of the conversation that you're simply not following because you have no idea what they're talking about. I think that as a as a team manager, it is important that you try to mentor people in your team in such a way that they see the flip side more than the simple fact that they don't understand what is being talked about. The flip side is there is the bliss of ignorance. They don't know. Well, that gives you a unique perspective to following the conversation. First, it gives you a position where you can very honestly say and admit that you have no idea what you're talking about, but that will give you a tool to force your colleagues into reducing the level of complexity to what they're talking about so that you can understand. And a way to do that is saying, act as if I were your grandmother and explain to me what you're talking about because I have no idea. And the reason you want to push that and the reason you want to encourage your staff team members to do that is because they need to understand the essence of what is being talked about in order to do their work in a meaningful way. And that is true for legal people when they have to write an agreement. That is also true for, say, people in an HR department when they have to get started on filling a certain vacancy, because you really need to understand what the profile is of the person we're looking for. And I think that that is equally true for many other um, staff department people. A bit linked to that is that you will be looking for people who are not shying away and becoming very silent and very withdrawn whenever I apologize for the pop-up whenever they don't know the topic of what is being discussed during a meeting. At the same time, you want them to have the audacity to ask questions. So, in selecting people to join your team, but also in growing the people who are in your team, you will focus on the importance of curiosity. You will be looking for, of course, if I'm looking for a lawyer, I will select on whether these people do or do not have a law degree. And if they should have a law degree. For me, that is clear cut. That is 100% true. But if I then need to think about what is the following criterion that I will use in my selection process, I will attach less importance to whether they have impressively high degrees at university. I will be looking for signs of these persons to be curious. Are they by Is their individual personality one where they are eager to learn stuff, and not only the stuff that is within their field of study, that is within their comfort zone, but how comfortable are these people and how eager are they to learn about things that they lack a basic background of? Because that is going to be so important, because if they're not curious, if they are not eager to also embrace this entire field of technology that they know nothing about, then how will they be able to speak up when they are in these meetings with colleagues, when they are preparing for conversations with the outside world, and in two, then asking the questions that really matter and are really essential for them to being able to do what they're supposed to be doing. So curiosity is key. Another element that I want to discuss is how important it is for people to build a network. And the network is one that should be beyond the boundaries of the staff team that they're working in. One of the big disadvantages for me in the whole pandemic situation has been that I've lost the incredible benefits of going to, well, having to take a walk to the coffee machine and spend some time there, meeting people casually, informally, and asking them, how are you doing? Hey, you asked me a question about such and such project 2, 3 weeks ago. How's that going? Have you made any progress? Were you able to make progress with the advice that you've given to me? And the problems that you signaled me on such and such a project, have you been able to resolve them? It is so important that we have these type of meetings, and in order to have those encounters, you need to be able who is walking around in your company and who the people are who are working on which spots. You need to understand what the biggest challenges are, what the biggest projects plans and future plans are for the people who work in your R&D department, in your sales department, but also in your operations department, because otherwise, how are they going to know that they might need your help, or it might be useful for them to reach out to you and ask you for your help? And it's not always easy. It was much easier when for me when I joined. Materialize was very small, so everybody knew everybody. Now with the growth of the company, that has become more challenging, and it is even more challenging since the start of the pandemic, because these informal and coincidental encounters no longer exist and no longer occur. A way of helping your team members to do that, if you are the team manager, is by giving them assignments where they will be forced to do many outreaches throughout the entire company. That is something I've learned. So building a network. Another thing, and this is one suggestion that was given to me and to the other staff unit managers by our CEO, by Fried van Kraan, years ago, and it still works. A staff team is always going to be one that will have to balance between two key underlying assignments. And that is, on the one hand, to help stimulate the progress of the company, and on the other hand, making sure that the core of the company is preserved. If I apply this to the legal environment and to our work within the legal department, of course, our assignment and our mission is to stimulate the progress, making sure that the business thrives and that all of the technologies, all of the solutions, the software, the hardware, the parts, you name it, the services that Materialize makes available to the outside markets grows and grows in a sustainable way. But that growth needs to be a careful growth. It needs to be one that does not jeopardize the core of Materialize. And I mean, the core of Materialize is know how, it is what is in the heads of our people. So anything that comes to that relates to the intellectual property of the company is going to be very important to be protected against the risk of potential inadvertent disclosure, that is protected against the risk of being taken away by people who should not be taking it away and using it for their own benefit. And if you think about that, that means that in our stimulation of progress, we will sometimes have to pull out our red flag and say no to certain things. And that's not easy, right? Because again, here comes the ignorance that plays a role. That will sometimes be a no that is based not so much on the content of the technology and on the technical side of things. That is going to be a no that is based on a risk evaluation that we will be making merely on the basis of our legal background, which is also an unknown world for the engineer. And that means that sometimes you will be confronted with people who are a bit unhappy because you've said no, and the only thing they want to do is close their deal because it seems so exciting. And they don't understand why you are, from your perceived ivory legal tower, why you are saying no to that deal. So you have to be very careful in when or when not to say no, but you should not shy away from it if you feel that from your mission to preserve the core, to protect the company against risks, that there might be a reason for not doing it. A following thing is the mantra that we're all in sales. When I talked earlier about the importance of sometimes having to say no and not being afraid to do that, the answer you will sometimes receive is that, well, but you're not in sales. You don't understand. You don't understand all of the challenges that I'm facing and my heavy need for closing this deal because you're not in sales. I think that that is a false contradiction. I think that any employee who works for a company, whether they are in the business and whether they're a sales profile or whether they are doing an entirely different job, such as being a part of a legal team, we're all in sales. Our interest is very much aligned with the interests of the salespeople. We all want to grow the turnover, if only for the very basic motivation that we want our salaries to be paid. But there's so much more to it than just that salary. We want the business to thrive. But from our perspective, from the perspective of the staff department, that will sometimes mean that in order to preserve the quality of the sales, we have to refuse some. If the accumulation of risks that are being incurred in closing a certain deal amount to a level that is simply too high, it will be the right decision to block that sale. And that is because we're all in sales. That is because we don't want people to spend time into a sales project, into a partnership arrangement that might potentially cost a lot more money. Eh? Because you need to defend against legal risks that you have seen and that materialize, and therefore there's a whole expensive litigation that comes from that. That is what you don't want, and that means sometimes that you will have to block a certain sale. So again, eh, do not refrain from sometimes giving pushback on the statement that you don't understand because you're not in sales. It's not true. We're all in sales. In order to be able to say that with a decent level of authority, remember when I talked earlier about the importance of building a network and gaining familiarity with what's going on in the business, that helps. People will be less inclined to tell you that you don't understand if they know and if they feel and if you can show that you are very well aware of what their big challenges are, that you're very well aware of which projects in the previous year have gone good, which projects were more difficult, and if also from the position that you have, which is a bit of a distant perspective, if you can say, I know that that is what you're trying to do, but I have also seen in another business unit or in another product line that something similar has happened, and what we've seen there is risks A, B, and C. How can we work together to make sure that that risk is controlled when you venture in this new project that you're thinking about? So, in that sense, the different points that I'm mentioning here are very much reinforcing each other. The last thing I want to talk about is the importance for, as a team manager, the importance of consciously building a career path. What you see here is the Greek letter psi, and this is a tool that we use within the company to develop career paths for people, where people start at the bottom in a very general job and then can grow into different directions. Their direction of growth can be into sales. Their direction of growth can also be into a more deep technical level, or they can grow to a management level. And then several combinations are possible. Now, of course, to say that legal people or staff members are going to be growing in a technical level is a bit harsh, because it's not obvious, right? Having them grow in a sales role is also not very obvious. And having them grow in a management role, well, for a staff unit, you can in principle only have one manager. So that may give you the false impression that career paths for staff department members are difficult to draw out. They're not. eh? They're not. And there is, of course, not one solution that where I can say any member of your staff department is going to grow into this type of a professional. But it's not because it's not easy that you shouldn't be thinking about it, that you shouldn't explore together with your people and together with the people in the business that they work with what their intrinsic qualities are. Because there are legal people, or there are finance and HR people who have a big affinity with business projects and with business contracts. Likewise, there are people in an IT service department that might have an affinity and an ambition and a drive and an eagerness to learn about the technology of what the company is doing. So there is possibilities, but what it requires from the manager of the team is a very open and a very conscious thinking about it and working on it together with the individual team member. And
Sorry
that's
to
what I wanted to
int-
share.
uh,
Yeah,
Oh,
I'm done.
perfect.
Yes.
Perfect. I was just going to say it's time for
Yes.
questions. I see a few. There's one which is there any specific time scenario you wish you could have hired more people instead of using automation?
No, the other way around. There was a time when I wish I had considered less finding a solution for the challenges we had in the team, less relying on expanding the workforce and more forcing us to rethink the way in which we were doing things, and trying to find automation to some of the processes that we were doing.
Okay. And then the last question is, what are the challenges for non-techie people working with engineers and technicians?
I'm sorry, what are challenges for non-techie people? The challenges?
Non-techie people. Yeah.
Well, I've tried to describe them. From a very personal perspective, for me, when I started working at the company, it was very much feeling isolated, in not knowing everything I didn't know. And then the key into finding piercing through that perceived problem of lack of ignorance was finding my buddies. I kind of I identified in the workforce two or three people that had really the ability to explain things in an easy and an understandable way. And when I find those buddies, I had one for software and one for hardware, then it became a lot easier because I could go to them firstly, and then get some basic introduction into what I didn't know, and then talk to the person that I had to talk to, with a lesser degree of the ignorance, which made the conversation less difficult.
Okay. And with that, we are at the end. Thank you so much, Carla, for sharing. It was a great presentation.
You're
And
welcome.
we shall actually switch to our next
Okay.
speaker.
Very well,
So,
Maddie. Thank you. Have a good
goodbye.
continuation of the conference. Bye. Talk later. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Okay, I will just invite our next participant onto the stage. And just to let you know, we will be listening right now to Sharon Jones from the BCP Council, who will be speaking about what is the legacy of a week-long pop-up for 3D printing. Welcome, Sharon. Sharon, is your camera on?
My camera is on and my mic. I'm not sure if you can hear me.
Perfect. Now I can. Welcome, Sharon. Well, you can, even if you have some poor connection, you can keep speaking. I'll let you know if we can't hear you. I will just share the presentation. Just let me know when you want to switch to page.
Thank you.
Can you see the presentation?
I can, yes, thank you. That's great.
Perfect.
So I'm so excited to be joining everybody today to talk about having hosted Printing Hub in a and actually we've gained from that and compare that with my own previous experience of 3D printing and engaging with the general public and the difference that that's made. So the happened in October of 2021, and it came about because a deprived area on the south coast accessed some funding from Central, which to struggling to charging their regeneration plans. And that significant investment will go over a number of years. And the partners in exploring this have been eager to bring test sites and opportunities to explore the assumptions made in the bid and to work out exactly the best way to invest that money. So along with 5 or 6 other partners that I'll explain a little, we hub with 5 days, Monday to Friday, have more than 350 visitors. And the 3D printing part of that engaged with more than 100 people on an individual. Everybody was able to do something hands-on. A quarter of those actually provided feedback that they were now considering building on their skills that would facilitate using 3D printing or associated in their future employment or career. This is right across the age range. So that was really interesting. If I could have the next slide, please, Maddie. Thank you. So, as I've explained, I'm Sharon. I've worked for the council now for 8 months. My work there is supporting economic development. So that is all about how we help businesses to grow, thrive. And that will often involve connecting people together, enabling how I work. But my background is in primary education, so I spent 19 years teaching 4 to 11-year-olds. Subject is actually music, so I don't have that technical background. So very interesting to have heard Carla speaking before. And within all of that, moving out of the classroom, my first move was actually into the financial services, where I became part of the High Street Bank looking after customer services, but very quickly got involved in a lot of the bank's outreach and involvement, which took me through coding sessions to being invited to help set up a commercial makerspace and business support function. So in 2015, I had my first introduction to 3D printing. I was given 3 days to spend in London, at Fab Labs London, where we were exposed to all sorts of ways in which makerspaces that came out of MIT. And I have to say, I was very rapidly hooked from somebody that didn't use a lot of technical skills. I came home from those 3 days, downloaded some free CAD software, and very quickly started exploring how I could design things whilst I knew I could still get my hands on some FDM printers and test those ideas out. Within 2 at the makerspace, the Ecolab makerspace, which the bank was setting up, and completed my interview proudly holding up a 3/4 printed coat hook, because I hadn't allowed myself quite enough time to get the hook printed before my interview time. Fortunately, was on screen even back 6 years ago, so I wasn't in any trouble for not having completed what I was doing. On the screen, Mork is one of the first 2 that the business invested in. I have to say, they have been brilliant workhorses. The one that you can see on the screen has actually sailed right round on a tool ship, and I've spent quite a lot of time over 5 years following that around and varying places, catching up with it. And the first thing I did when I changed job was to invest in my own 3D printer, because I'd become so used to having that facility myself. Very excited. Over the 5 years I spent at Barclays Eagle Labs, I had great chances to develop my skills, but a lot of what I do has been self-taught. I'm really lucky that I've been supported not only by the business, but family. So my husband are engineers, and whilst there have been heated discussions from one end of the sofa to the other about a good way to design something, it's been brilliant to see how the cross-pollination between more traditional manufacturing methods and additive have actually helped all of us with developing in roles. I've been privileged to have been recognised by the Women's Engineering Society in their top 50 women engineers in 2018, and then the following year by We Are the City's Tech Women. But nothing I do is all about myself. It's those networks and the partnerships that you can build that facilitate collaboration that truly make the difference. And that's one of the reasons I wanted to share this pop-up week with you. So to just give you context, and I'm interested just looking at the it's invited counsel in this. I've almost been invited into the economic development team because of myself and what I did with the printers and the work through there. We have a very diverse engineering industry in the county. Alongside that, we've got great further education establishments, including a purpose-built innovation studio that's available to all businesses, which now has 9 or 10 different types of 3D printers and great access for people to work with. If I could have the next slide. So within our pop-up week, we had a number of zones, and I do have to tell you that this got arranged in a time period of 6 weeks. So there are some things I may have done differently if I'd had longer to beforehand. But alongside the 3D printing zone, which I'll tell you a little bit more about, there was an area which focused on extended reality. So virtual reality, augmented reality, with lots of crossovers to some of the 3D areas that we're creating, whether it's for design, working through. And you can see there that we had a lunch and learn that was focused on planet scale AR, which was really interesting to look at the similarities between designing in that way and how that's applied in the games industry. The focus of the week, called Future Skills and Employment Week, was very much around help to
what their next steps might be for their career and learning.
So focusing on people who might be changing career due to the pandemic or looking for their next stage in learning as students, and guiding them in the pathways to acquire those digital skills. So the Career Zone was staffed by various organisations. For those people that aren't in the UK, I'll just share that DWP is our central government job centre, job seekers support. So for those people who have been employed, unemployed.
Alongside that, authorities have adult skills and learning
opportunities. And we partnered this up with our Intelligent or Smart Cities project, which is called Smart Place, and a European entrepreneurial team who are called Speed You Up, who again focus on digital skills and empowerment for people. You'll see the smaller, less colourful boxes on the screen just talk through, one, the importance of having concierge, so somebody that was going to smile at people as they came through the door. And just
welcome them to see what was there.
We also had a pop-up business school that was run by partners, the Dorset Growth Hub. And with that, because we were embracing digital, actually looking at a demonstration of a potential platform to use local opportunities for learning through the universities and colleges, and signpost people on their career paths. If I could have the next slide, please, Maddie. So with all of these things going on during the week, there were some things that went
given a different set of circumstances.
So the 3D Printing Hub was in one part of what used to be a coffee shop, so part of a national coffee chain that had withdrawn from the business in a beautiful Victorian arcade between lockdowns, I could say, within the UK. So the building itself, the arcade, is inside scaffolding. We literally signed the lease the week before we moved in, so anything that was in the space was hired or and brought together. We found that actually just making a little bit of sound and noise, putting some graphics up on the windows, and having something that people wanted important. So as well as the printers, which you can see in the background, and myself sitting there with a laptop, we had a number of 3D printed objects that people could interact with, not just from the FDM printers that we had available for people to be hands-on during the week, but also from a range of printers, whether that was what our universities and their research with different materials and different processes, right through to my treat for the week, which was I bought a little Microzini printer that, which if you squint, you can see that there. We found all sorts of people attended the drop-in times, and that they really went right through from parents with primary children, number of people in the 16 to 30 age range, but right through to grandparents who had passed to see something going on and felt like there was a friendly face. And the key activities were there were things and people felt able to pick things up, to ask questions about them. And it meant they didn't have to maintain eye contact, so it was much easier for people to interact and actually shuffle it eventually wanted to be. The other thing was, by having short activities like printing, key rings, bookmarks, much easier and myself with just one person there. It took 3 days, but the lady sitting there on the 3rd day decided to actually have a go. And it turned out that she doesn't have access to a computer, hasn't used a computer. And one of the reasons she was wandering around this town centre was to come to appointments with her support worker. Her support worker was at a local job. On that 3rd day, she sat down with me. She went through the process of adding her own design onto a keyring, which we printed. Whilst it was printing, she decided she had to be at an appointment, but she went away to go and talk to her support worker and explained that she'd actually, with some support, used a computer. And by the time she came, she's got an agreement that they would explore a volunteering role in a local retail outlet for her. I've been back to the area a couple of times since, and she's happily ensconced actually making that paid employment. And if it had been just that from the week, that would have been a great thing for me. But what we really found with the people that interacted with us was that they needed to be reassured that there wasn't a particular agenda to sell them something. I wasn't there to sign them up to a particular course. And because of that, they were able to really interact and get involved and moved much further through. And thank you, Matt, hearing you talking about 21st century skills, absolutely. It was that need. And things we noticed is there's an education facility called Swarak, which looks after late 20s, early 30s, who have disengaged with formal education at some point in time and have specialised programs to help them re-engage. And they came across in small groups, participated as far as they felt able in the activities there. But a number of those young people came back, engaged more independently, and had gone from following instructions to saying, oh, I found this thing on this website, or I'd like to make this for my mum or my friend, and actually starting to be much more independent we're doing. For me, again, there's those two words, one that's tactile, two, that there was a tangible, almost immediate result was really important. So those activities that I'd meant as time fillers actually were the primary engagers for conversation. Having that facilitation seemed to be the best way to help people to open up and engage. The second photograph I've got on the screen there, where you can see the packed room and perhaps realise the ambition of having something so big and complex in a disused shop, was I'd spent 5.5 years at a makerspace and co-working facility where my primary job was to bring and get businesses to come together and collaborate. And I never achieved what's on the screen there, which was to actually bring businesses together and get them sharing their journeys into additive and that happen. So we had 33 different businesses from the area come along to listen to some fabulous speakers. And those speakers, although they had great professional qualifications and introduced additive, they'd all taken quite unorthodox routes into what they were doing. So for those of you that will recognize the brands, Lush, the ethical cosmetics company, they have their in Paul, which is part of BCP. And Damien, who is just the one that's on the screen there speaking, he went from mold making to actually running a facility and other digital fabrication equipment, to the point where now Lush operate a model where they've got printers in their manufacturing facilities in other countries, and the designs can be created here in Paul and sent across in response to the fires in Australia last year, which literally was turned around within a week from the idea to being on sale globally. So he was a great speaker. We had Ekaterina, who's the first sketch co-lab tutor. So she's a footwear designer that I've worked with actually for 4 or 5 years, who is now creating her products using virtual reality design, and we had a number of her shoes that we'd printed prototypes for available during the week. And bringing that back to people who have been through brand names like Dyson and engaged with additive at every stage of their and then brand name to forming their own companies and showing their expertise. So, you know, a highlight for me was actually being able to bring so many businesses together and get them talking about what they do and how they can develop that. Next slide, please. Not everything in the week was perfect. What surprised me, as well as having so many people to the business event, was actually the day until Sunday were actually largely ignored. So we had the opportunity to talk specifically about additive in fashion, which personally I thought would be really appealing. The same with looking at how additive is assistive tools, particularly focused on music there, but in so many ways. And those sessions were just not by anybody, and the conclusions from chattering with those that were coming in during those times was very much people didn't want to feel channeled into doing X. They wanted the freedom to explore in their own time and work through. So you've got up on your screen there, the half-formed photo, which I'm not quite sure why I've lost that there, is actually a 3D print that was created by some clients of the Bournemouth town centre with the buildings there. And anybody that lives in the area very quickly managed to orient themselves and work out what it's like walking on that. And that was great as a method to engage people to talk. And actually, since then, because of the regeneration work going on in Boscombe, there's an ambition to actually bring together and create a consultation of the area with drop-in buildings. So that's great. I know I've got architectural firms now getting more interested in additive. The picture at the top is of that chocolate printer together with one of our local counsellors, my colleague. And for me, it's really important to say, yes, I have a lot of energy, and yes, I loved the week and engaging with those 100 people, but I couldn't have done that if it was only me. My colleague Eddie actually helped set up the first UK Fab Lab in Manchester. Incredible that we're getting to work together in the south of the country. But that was at least one with a really broad knowledge of additive and the ways that it can be used in business. And he was there through the week to support and also to engage with people and talk through. The three people who are on the screen there grinning away, we actually had an automatic photo booth like you often see at weddings and parties and things like that. It was one of our ways of collecting, and those people that really varied right through from one of those Swarak, who went from somebody that wasn't prepared to talk at all to visiting a couple of times during the week, and she came back on the Friday afternoon and actually wanted to move from the cheaty way I was photographs or grayscale to affect the height of a print, to actually getting into three-dimensional design. And she's gone on to again self-teach herself through those things and working through. The other young lady who's proudly holding her chocolate print, she's one of the counsellor's daughters. She'd come in, she did not want to engage with this careers hub and was quite cross that her parents were expecting. Actually, by the time we'd about animals and why the printer was printing the way that it was printing, relaxed a little bit and started to go through and to actually engage not just with the 3D printing but with the careers advice and support that was there. And the gentleman clutching the robot, that I know at least one person in the audience is going to be very aware of that particular brand there. He has a window cleaning business. He'd come in for but actually ended up engaging with a couple of hands-on workshops that were going on during the week. And again, he just absolutely, that his reason that he'd come back and had actually engaged with what we were doing was because he'd sat there and watched this thing printing and had got quite interested with that. And I was printing my usual little robots. He'd seen the large one that was in the window. I possibly just take my photo with this. So very excited. Next slide, please. So through the week, we had some key learn. How it falls space that was open to the community, money, being perceived both people that were running the workshops and engaging, as we got the through for individuals, businesses. So in 5 days there, I got to talk to businesses and experts that I had been trying for 2 or 3 years to get in touch with. Really important is, as well as that week, to think about the what next. So I fielded a lot of questions about where can we get a 3D printer from? How could we use this in our lessons? How can my business benefit from this? What do I need? So actually, my 5.5 years previous experience was very useful there in looking at that. And of our engineering manufacturing cluster, that together with the innovation studio were really key to go through. I'm not sure if Maddie will be able to share the YouTube link, but that's actually just a 40-second video, which gives you a bit of flavour of the whole thing, if you are interested in that. And then I've just got one last slide, Maddie, but I realise about the time.
Yes, we can look at it very, very quickly, but then we need to move on. Let's just wrap it up in a moment, and I will share the YouTube link on the chat afterwards.
Thank you. I really appreciate. For me, I probably described that whole legacy, that from there's been massive take up in terms of planning those 21st complementary skills into curricula for schools, for further education, and I think it's really important that those digital skills, and particularly additive, are in a permanent hub, and that hub happens. And the joy of the business collaborations are there. But for me, I found enough kindred spirits to be about having a printing chapter here on the South Coast. So thank you all very much.
Well, thank you so much, Sharon. And with that, we will move on to our next speaker. Thank you so much for the presentation, and do feel free to reach out to Sharon if you have any questions. Yes, you are on the screen, Laura. So we will, just to let you know, oh, sorry, that is the wrong thing. We are now moving to the, sorry. Give me one moment. So we are now moving on to the TCT Women in 3D Printing Innovator Awards. Welcome, Laura. I'll let you take it from here.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. Hi, everyone. Great to be here at Type 2022. I am Laura Griffiths. I am TCT Head of Content, and I'm so happy to be announcing today's TCT Women in 3D Printing Innovator Award finalists. So thank you so much for joining us, and thank you to the organisers of Type and Women in 3D Printing for collaborating with us on this very special award, and also hosting this fantastic event too. So for those of you who are unfamiliar with the TCT group, just a quick intro to us. TCT has been around in the additive manufacturing industry, providing AM and 3D printing intelligence since 1992, which makes this year our 30th year, which is pretty exciting. And as you can see here, our magazines and digital products and events cover the AM landscape across Europe, North America, and Asia. One of those events is our TCC Awards. And a few years ago, we got together with Women in 3D Printing to launch this brand new award. The TCC Awards overall celebrates the achievements, innovations, and all important collaborations within the additive manufacturing industry. And we really wanted to shine a light on the achievements of women in the industry, hence the collaboration with Women in 3D Printing. So back in 2019, we launched the first award, and as you can see there, our first winner was Professor Y. Young, Program Director at the Singapore Centre for 3D Printing. Then back in 2020, we opened the vote again and asked the AM and 3D printing audience to submit their nominations for who could be the next TCT Women in 3D Printing Innovator Award winner. Hundreds of nominations were sent in by the community, and they were then whittled down by TCT and Women in 3D Printing to a short list of 5, which was very, very difficult. But I'm very pleased today to be announcing the 5 finalists that we have, and to also launch the public vote, which you'll be able to do right after this session closes. And so let's just get into it. Without further ado, here they are. Our finalists for the 2022 TCT Women in 3D Printer Innovator Awards. Madeline, if you could bring up the rest of the panelists. Hello. Now, I'm sure many of you will recognise the women on our panel today for their work in the additive manufacturing industry and various achievements. And we're going to talk to them today about their journey into the additive manufacturing industry, what they're doing now, and also what's coming next. So I am very pleased to welcome our finalists today. We have Eliana Fu, Industry Manager for Aerospace and Medical at Trump, Diana Calise, Vice President for Materials at 3D Systems, Ellen Lee, Technical Leader of Additive Manufacturing for Research and Advanced Engineering at Ford Motor Company, Candice Majewski, Senior Lecturer in Mechanical Engineering at the University of Sheffield, and Katie Milne, Head of Industrial Strategy for Fly Zero. Great to have you all with us for this panel. I know it's super early for some of our panelists too, so sorry, but thank you also for taking the time to join us today. And Candice, I must say, when I was bringing together this image, I was very happy about your colour scheme on your hat and her dye, because it matched very well with the TCT Awards branding, so thank you very much. So let's get into it then. Hopefully we'll have some time for some audience participation at the end, so please feel free to use the Q&A function and to add in your questions. But as we have 5 panelists to get through it, we're going to try and run through as many questions as possible, but we'll hopefully have some time at the end. So yeah, let's just get into it and start. So I want to start by asking each of you about what led you into the 3D printing and additive manufacturing industry, your current roles in the industry and your current areas of interest. So I think we'll start with Eliana. So tell us about what led you into additive manufacturing and what you're working on right now.
Yeah, I am so happy to be here. Thank you very much for inviting me, and thank you very much for being allowing me to be a nominee. I actually came from traditional metalworking. I didn't even know what 3D printing was until about 10 or 15 years ago. So my background is traditional titanium metallurgy. And what I noticed is more and more of my customers were asking for product for 3D printing. And I was like, what's that? I should find out about that. So I actually got more in depth in that when I joined SpaceX. They were one of my customers, actually recruited me. And I just started working on raw material supply, 3D printing processes. I was senior engineer at Relativity Space. And the amazing thing about 3D printing is that it allows us to do these kind of unique shapes, designs, profiles, and things like that. In my role as industry manager at Trumpf, I'm looking after aerospace and medical. So those are two amazing industry sectors that can benefit from 3D printing. And one of the things I'm most interested in at the moment is using the green laser for 3D printing and making a lot of development on that. So we have a couple of challenges, but the door is wide open for enhanced products, especially in reflective materials like copper, gold, platinum, silver, and palladium, and so on. And I'm very looking forward to finding out what else can be printed with a green laser.
And we're definitely going to talk to you a little bit more about green laser later on in the panel session. Diana, what about you? What about your journey into additive manufacturing and what you're up to right now?
Well, thanks so much for having me. And it has been a really interesting journey. I originally came out of aerospace and was working in an area where I was using lasers and optics to measure fluid flows around various types of objects and through like pipes and such like that. I actually moved, and it was total happenstance that I was looking for a job in technology. And I basically stumbled across 3D printing. That was very early. This was in 1989. So the very first SLA1 had come out, but beyond that, there was no other 3D printing. So I brought my experience with lasers and optics and bringing hardware together into 3D printing, and it's been just an extraordinary journey since then. Now my focus is on using 3D printing for direct production of parts, particularly on the plastics side. So I do have a connection with our metals groups, but my work is all in the plastics. And so my work is working with customers to figure out how to use 3D printing directly for making plastic parts that can be used for real production in place of standard methodologies.
Thank you. And I'm really looking forward to getting into your experiences over such a long career in the additive manufacturing industry later on. Ellen, how about you?
Well, hi, Laura, and good morning to everybody. I agree. It's such an honor to be here, one of the nominees. So I'm excited to hear more from the others, as well as learn more about the participants here at the conference. For me, I've been working with additive manufacturing technologies for about 8 years now, but I've been at Ford Motor Company in our research organization for 23 years. And my focus has been in materials and manufacturing innovations. And so throughout my career, I've always been aware of additive manufacturing, but primarily as a prototyping tool. So naturally, I kind of came to it from that point of view. So it was about 8 years ago when I was approached by our prototyping lab about what to do with our waste SLS powder and how to reduce it. And I wondered to myself at the time, as I started to dig into, how can we improve the sustainability of it? I wondered to myself whether we could use additive manufacturing as a tool in the sustainable materials development that I was doing for conventional manufacturing. And because in that development, we're constantly challenged by doing component level testing, but not having mold tools to test those parts. And so I naively thought, oh, we could just develop the material, 3D print it, test it, and there we go. We would kill two birds with one stone. And so once I discovered that the process structure property relationships in additive manufacturing were relatively unexplored, and that there was a big gap in having robust functional materials to use additive manufacturing beyond prototyping, I was hooked. So I immediately wanted to learn everything I could about it, and I started to develop a strategy of what other use cases we could use additive manufacturing for in the automotive industry. And so I saw a huge opportunity because from the materials and manufacturing background, we could really, as well as the automotive experience, we could really start to address those gaps to get to the scaled use for production. So today, I'm the technical leader in our research organization at Ford to set forth the technical roadmap and the development of the strategy for use of additive manufacturing, and primarily to address on the technical side how to cover those gaps so that we can use it more widely.
Mm-hmm. Great, thank you. Looking more forward to getting into the kind of roadmap and how you're implementing that at Ford a little bit later on. Candice, how about you? You're coming at this from the side of academia.
Yeah, so I'm an academic at the University of Sheffield. I guess my job as an academic is kind of a mishmash of lots of different aspects, which I really enjoy. On a research side, I'm focused around powdered polymer additive manufacturing systems, and in particular, as Ellen was mentioning, these structure-property relationships, how the materials behave in the machines, how we can develop more materials, how we can make those materials more reliable, that sort of thing. I also do quite a bit of teaching. So I think I mentioned in my profile, I've done taught over about 1,000 students I worked out, which is something I'm really excited for, year on year. And then little bits of other things. So, outreach activities, working on equality and diversity initiatives within the university as well, because I think that's really important. I kind of fell into additive manufacturing completely by accident. I was in the final semester of my university undergraduate in mechanical engineering. We had a guest lecture from someone who spoke to us about rapid prototyping, as it was still called at the time. And I just was completely captivated by it. It was completely accidental. Coincidentally, I actually had a graduate job lined up at Ford Motor Company to go into when I finished my degree. And like I say, I saw this 3D printing thing and I thought, wow, that's kind of it. So yeah, I think for anyone who's watching who hasn't found the thing they're passionate about yet, it's kind of perhaps proof that you don't have to know from really early on what you want to do. And I guess just keep an eye out for those things and find those opportunities. But yeah, completely by accident, and that one lecture, everything kind of changed, and here I am.
That's such an important point, and we'll definitely get more into that a little bit later on in the conversation. And finally, Katie, tell us about how you got into the AM industry.
So probably also slightly accidentally, I was doing my doctorate at Rolls-Royce, but focused on a different manufacturing process, so metal matrix composites. And my field's actually non-destructive testing rather than additive manufacturing explicitly, but I've always looked at how you can apply non-destructive testing and measurement to kind of advancing or maturing those new metal processes. So once I finished that doctorate, they kind of encouraged me to go and apply to this new thing, which was not quite called it's now called the high value manufacturing catapult, but it wasn't called it then. It became the high value manufacturing catapult a year or two later. So I applied to one of the centres there, and I was based right at the beginning at Birmingham University, which is another university in the UK that does a lot on additive. And I remember seeing they were trying to print a belt buckle, and it really didn't work. This was in 2010. But I was like, it really brought home to me the potential. It didn't work, but I was like, if they could just fix that, there's so many amazing things that could be done. So then I started doing my work in the Catapult Centre, and I worked on a massive project in the early noughties, which was in the early 2010s, again with Rolls-Royce, which was to print the biggest front bearing house or biggest metallic additively manufactured part that had ever been made for aerospace, and it was a front bearing house. Sheffield University were actually also involved, and their partner centre, the AMRC, and I was focused on understanding what the failure mechanisms were during manufacturing, using all the imaging techniques I could throw at it, ultrasonics and X-ray, and helping them to build the quality standards. And then kind of later in my career went on to lead a big UK supply chain project for aerospace called Drama. It finished at the end of last year, so the end of 20. Oh, crikey, I'm going to get confused. At the end of 2020, my dog's just come back in. Working from So I might show them to you in a minute. And in that, we expanded our facilities at the MTC so we could better help supply chain companies, but we also worked with 23 aerospace supply chain companies who were kind of at different stages in their adoption, help them learn about it, understand it, get some hands-on experience in metal powder bed additive manufacturing. So that's been my journey. And now I'm in this completely bonkers project called Fly Zero, which I might talk about a little bit later, which is all about building hydrogen aeroplanes, and additive manufacturing has come up a little bit in that. So
great, thank you so much. Well, as you can see, we've got quite a range of areas of expertise on this panel. So I really want to dive into some specific questions with each of our speakers and then bring it back around later on to ask some more general questions. So I think I want to start with Eliana, and you mentioned the green laser stuff that you're working on right now. And I know you've already presented this week on the same topic. So I just want to ask you about what you are doing with that green laser technology and kind of why it is such an untapped resource at the moment.
Yeah, if you were able to catch my presentation last night, but if you're not, I probably will present it again somewhere. But as you know, the green laser is providing superior results compared to IR. So especially with reflective materials like copper, and then also precious metals like gold, platinum, palladium, and silver. I mean, the main interest from industry has been pure copper for electrical thermal conductivity. But where I see its huge benefit is for space. And so a lot of people have been moving away from the nickel-based alloys for the rocket engine thrusters and chambers and so on, and actually combining that with a copper inner chamber with a nickel jacket on the outside. And that combination of additive processes, whether you start with a powder bed copper part and then finish with a DED nickel or some kind of bimetallic, I think that the green laser can offer tremendous advantages in building those kind of structures. So our challenge right now is to try and implement that on a machine. We have it on the smallest powder bed machine that Trump makes, which is 100 millimeters. So it's not very big, but I really see that being an advantage for DED, especially the freeform DED. So that's kind of where I'm trying to look and find out who's going to be the first one to 3D print a copper engine that can be hot fire tested.
Great, and I'm sure that participants will be able to catch up on that presentation on the Women 3D Printing YouTube channel later on. Diana, moving on into you now, you spoke about your long career in the AM industry, and I know you said you're concentrating more on the polymer side, and I just wondered, since you've been in the industry for such a long time, you've really seen the evolution of the technology and how 3D printing applications have advanced. Can you talk about how materials have really played a role in that, and how you're seeing that in your role as VP of Materials at 3D Systems? Is anybody else able to hear Diana?
Oh,
No.
I am so sorry.
Sorry. No worries. Somebody had to do it.
lots of mouth movement, no sound. So when I first started, of course, it really was just rapid prototyping. And when we got a part that was roughly the shape of the CAD, we were so excited. And the materials were not really very useful except for prototyping. And you know, when you tried to build a flat part, it turned out to be an elf shoe. But since then, the materials are so important, because I've always said to our teams that what the customer wants is a part in their hand, and it's got to be a useful part. The level of complexity and what it takes to make that happen really is not the customer's problem. They want their part. So the key thing that I've been working on most recently is the innovations in materials that have allowed us to get to parts that really do rival both the properties and the longevity of standard plastics. And that is a whole new frontier for polymers in 3D printing. So that's what I'm most excited about, and that's what I work on with customers to say, okay, how can we introduce this into true manufacturing, not just prototyping? And there are certain places, you know, in every case, it's not a Star Trek replicator, so it's not right for every application, but there are a lot of things we can do that people never imagined at the time, certainly when I started, that you'd be able to do with 3D printing. And so it's really exciting. It's very challenging because there are a lot of perceptions about 3D printing that are currently incorrect. But once you can understand what a customer wants to do and bring forward what 3D printing can do today, it opens just amazing places for it to go. So I've been excited for the last more than 30 years, and I'm even more excited now.
Great, and I am glad to see that we're seeing less of those Star Trek replicators analogies in 3D printing. So moving on to Ellen now. Ellen, you're coming at this from a user of additive manufacturing, of course, working with a huge company, Ford Motor Company. You've established the dedicated AM research program in 2014. Can you perhaps share with us some of the unique opportunities and challenges around introducing and implementing a new technology like additive manufacturing in a major company like Ford?
Of course, and before I start, I just wanted to comment to Diana that it's funny that as one of the experts in additive manufacturing and really trying to pull applications for it, I find that most telling people not to use additive manufacturing for that specific application because of that perception that it can do anything. So as I said earlier, I spent my time at Ford Motor Company in an innovation role in our research organization. So I've always spent my time looking for emerging technologies and trends and how we can apply them to our products and processes. So I guess you could say I like a challenge because I feel energized to prove people wrong when they say that something can't be done. So one of the benefits of being in a big company with a very complex product is that there are so many opportunities in which additive manufacturing can provide value. But the challenge is that implementing major changes is, we often say it's like steering the Titanic, because on the product side, you know, changing one small thing, it's a complex system. So from the system's point of view, changing one thing affects, you know, so many other things. Similarly, changing one thing in the process also changes so many other steps in that process. And so you need to work with that systems mindset and understand how everything affects everything else. And so for the process changes, we need to have very good alignment and buy-in to get all of the oars rowing in the same direction. Mm-hmm. So the good news is that from Ford Motor Company's point of view, our leadership understands that as a large company, we still need to be able to operate with the agility of a small company. So this starts with excellent communication and human-centered design. We're always asking ourselves what our customers would like, and fortunately, we're all customers ourselves because we almost all of us drive a vehicle every day. Maybe less so now during the pandemic, but as part of the research organization, Ford depends on us to tell the company where and when we need to turn. So once we have that alignment, we're able to put forth the appropriate, sometimes very large resources. So in the case of additive manufacturing, when we convince senior leadership of the huge potential we could have in different areas, both in the short term and in the long term, you know, investing in that long-term development, we are able to get significant resources for those capabilities. And in fact, it resulted in us building the Advanced Manufacturing Center that has a lot of really great state-of-the-art additive, as well as other advanced manufacturing capabilities. So the continuing challenge is that we need to remember that we're a mobility company, not an additive manufacturing company. So it's not our #1 priority. So we do need to take that, you know, into consideration, that additive is another tool in the toolbox that has to work well with the other manufacturing processes that we have.
Great, thank you. And Candice, you're helping to train the next generation of people that are going to be using additive manufacturing technologies. And you said in your intro that you've taught over 1,000 undergraduate and master students, which is super impressive, especially for anyone that still thinks that additive manufacturing is a brand new technology. The education gap is something that is often cited as another challenge in the additive manufacturing industry. And I just wondered what's your take on how that gap is being closed now?
Well, I think we're getting there. I think there's still a way to go. One of the issues that we were talking about maybe, 10 years ago or so was we were seeing this thing where lots of companies were getting in lots of machines. They were bringing additive into their companies, into their environments, but without the people to know what to do with it. And so we were seeing this real gap between getting equipment into machines and getting skilled people in. We're seeing, I think, quite a lot of different types of training now. So obviously I'm coming at it from a university level. We're seeing apprenticeships, we're seeing bespoke courses, we're seeing more 3D printing in schools and all of that. So I think we're getting a nice breadth of kind of exposure to these technologies. But when I really think about it, I think we're not looking for engineers or materials people or marketing people or whoever specifically. I think it really comes down to we're looking for people who can solve problems. And so for anyone who's been using 3D printing for any amount of time, you probably have the understanding that, it can be a bit finicky. There are things that don't always work perfectly. As the others have mentioned, it's not always the right thing to use for a specific application. So one of the things we're trying to do is kind of develop that problem solving ability. I come at it from a position of most of the additive systems out there, you can train someone to use it relatively quickly and relatively easily. And that's fine when everything's working, but it's when something's not working that you need that problem solving ability. You need to be able to look at it and say, what are the areas of the process that something could be wrong? Have I stored my material wrong, or have I just got a dodgy batch, or is something wrong on the machine? We need to replace something, or we need some maintenance, or have we done something to the parts after we've produced them that has caused a problem? And then at the very bigger scale, excuse me, I think we also see the same need for problem solvers in the large company situations. What type of products within our company could we be using additive for? And if we've decided we should be using additive, what's the exact process and materials that we should be using for these things? So I think for me, it's getting the message out there that actually, if you're the type of person who solves problems and has this analytical approach to things, then actually there's so many areas of the whole additive chain that you probably have a place in. So I think that for me is where the enjoyment comes, is seeing people develop that kind of ability to problem solve the different areas of the process or the supply chain and kind of reach those decisions.
Okay. And finally, Katie, you're leading a really exciting project, as you described at the start, with Fly Zero, which aims to lay the UK roadmaps to zero carbon aviation. Can you talk about the role that additive manufacturing is playing there? I know you said it's a kind of a small role right now, and how AM perhaps lends itself to the progress been made for that overall mission.
Well, just to give some context about what Fly Zero is, it's a project that's being run by an organisation called the UK's Aerospace Technology Institute. And it's made up of about 100 secondees that have come from companies across aerospace, but also some other industries. And we've been given a year, so 100 brilliant people, not me, but the others, and a year to try and kind of figure out how the UK should compete on aircraft. So there's this big revolution happening. You've probably seen it. You'll have seen stuff like air taxis, for example, which are powered by batteries. But we were really interested in how you could decarbonize long distance flight, really, and and your trip to Costa del Sol or your flight to New York. How can you decarbonize that? So we didn't look so much at replacements for helicopters. We looked at replacements for the 737 and the A320, that kind of thing. So the project concluded quite early on that the kind of most viable route for that is to use hydrogen as a fuel. That gives you zero carbon tailpipe emissions and significantly reduce, so 60%. It depends, like reduction in the overall like warming emissions that come from the aircraft. And then beyond that assessment, we've created these 3 concept aircraft that kind of are a big thought experiment. They embody all the trade-offs that you'd have to go through and help us as a nation, the UK, understand like what's difficult about solving this problem, I suppose. And we've identified a number of technologies that are going to be really critical, but also the UK could compete on. So I've just put down a list here to remind myself. So those are hydrogen fuel systems and tanks, hydrogen combustors within the gas turbine, and then the wings on these future aircraft will not contain fuel anymore, probably, because the hydrogen takes up a lot more volume. So they're going to have to move where it is. Current aircraft have kerosene in the wings, but they're going to have to move where it is into pods or into the fuselage. So because of that, the wings will be dry wings, and they could be made in a completely different way from as they're made now. So just to say those things again there, hydrogen fuel systems and tanks, the hydrogen combustor in the gas turbine, and dry wings. And there are applications for additive manufacturing across kind of all 3 of those areas, both for like improving the performance of things like heat exchangers, valves and pumps, for realizing the combustors, which will have lots and lots of little injection holes in them. They'll be different from kerosene injectors because hydrogen has tiny flames and burns differently. But also just for general lightweighting, you know, if you're doing a clean sheet design of new aircraft, then why would you not use or cash in, I suppose, the manufacturing processes that allow you to do things like lightweighting or significantly improve performance. So additive manufacturing is a massive opportunity, I suppose, for these new aircraft, and one that I think the community kind of needs to jump on top of. And what was really nice was obviously I'm a bit of an advocate for additive manufacturing, given my background, but I didn't push it in the project, and they came up with that conclusion anyway. So it will appear in lots of the outputs. That was really nice.
Yeah, that's certainly a really nice outcome when you don't have to advocate for the technology yourself and industry has already heard of it. That's great. As we are in the people track at Type, I'm going to move slightly away from the more technical questions and on to more just about people, really. And I'm interested to know if there is anything each of you might tell your younger self now about entering the additive manufacturing industry that might be useful for anybody who's listening on the panel today and maybe thinking about entering the AM field or making a career change. Anybody want to take that one first?
I can jump in on that if that's
Great.
okay. I think the number one thing I'd say to people now is jump on social media. Because so many people that I've met and so much information that I've found both in additive and in other areas, just by kind of being on Twitter, seeing what's going on, you know, you've got LinkedIn there as a great way of meeting up with people and connecting with people. But I think the nice thing in particular about things like Twitter is you can kind of go at your own pace. And so you can spend a bit of time just kind of follow some people who are doing cool stuff in the area you're interested in, see the sort of stuff they're sharing, follow up on that. And it kind of gives you this chance to learn a bit and kind of assimilate some of that information from people. And then when you feel comfortable to start engaging and kind of having conversations and commenting on things, you can do it. But I guess it's a very low risk way of kind of finding information. You might find good mentors there, you might find good friends through it or whatever. But I think being able to go at your own pace and kind of be exposed to all that information without the risk of kind of having to engage straight away is a really good thing. So I'd really encourage people to make as much use of that as they can. And actually, if it had been more prominent, I'm showing my age now, if it had been more prominent when I was starting out, I think I would have really enjoyed being able to engage in those sort of ways. So that's probably my best advice to people, actually.
That's a great point. Anybody else?
Yeah, I'll build off of that. So I was thinking the same, in that there's so many different things that you can do in the additive manufacturing industry that that's a great start to see what's going on. But then the next step is to really figure out which aspect really excites you the most. And then think about what your own skill set is. And by skill set, I don't mean necessarily, if you are good at programming or if you have, analytical skills. What I mean is think about what you can bring of value to some aspect of additive manufacturing. I think it was Candace who mentioned problem solving. So really think about, if problem solving is your thing, what types of work can you do in additive manufacturing to, say, develop a strategy, or to do research to really understand how to get a technical aspect off the ground. So I think really look into yourself to see what is exciting. And then once you've done that, venues like this, conferences, networking, to find mentors who can help you to develop those skill sets even more and give you advice from their experience about what steps that you should take. So Women in 3D Printing is a great resource for finding mentors, as well as going through social media. And don't be afraid to just reach out to somebody, because everybody wants to help and kind of remembers when we were searching around for what we wanted to do when we grew up. I'm still looking for what I want to do when I grow up.
One thing that I'll mention is that things are going to come up that you don't expect. And so this, especially in this industry, it's moving so fast that take advantage of opportunities that pop up. It's great to have a plan. Absolutely. No issue. I'm a planner from way back. But also keep your eyes open. Keep your eyes and ears open within your company. People have mentioned looking at social media and kind of what's going on out in the world. And look for those opportunities and take advantage of things that interest you, because you'll end up doing things that you really, really didn't expect. I sure did.
Great. Anybody else got anything to add to that question? Okay, moving on to this next one then. We have such a broad range of expertise, as I've already mentioned on this panel, and I wondered if there is kind of an area or a topic in the industry that you think we need to be talking more about. So perhaps any challenges or any other untapped application areas that you think need to have more attention on them.
Yeah, I've got something which is maybe a bit off topic, but I think it still relates to the people strand. So obviously I have like an Asian background, despite my British accent. By the way, Asian people are everywhere and have all kinds of accents. But since the pandemic came on, especially in the US, we've seen increasing number of anti-Asian hate crimes, which are despicable. And I felt very angry and upset about this. I mentioned to Women in 3D Printing, I would love to have a discussion about it. And last year we were able to, Ellen was actually on a panel too, have a discussion about what to do about this kind of rising anti-Asian hate that's going on, and what we as participants or leaders in Women in 3D Printing or in manufacturing and as people of color can do to help even other people or ourselves cope with this situation, or find mechanisms to counter all this sort of like negative messaging that's been going on. I won't repeat the awful words, but I couldn't believe it. I can make a report of all the anti-Asian hate crimes where an Asian person has been kicked, punched, stabbed, slashed, kicked in the head, kicked in the stomach, pushed down the stairs, pushed in front of the train. Last week, a woman was pushed in front of the train and died. And it's not stopping. So, it was, I will say it's been great to be aware of those things, but also to just be aware of taking part. Please don't feel alone, because you're not alone. There's plenty of people that feel like you, and there's help and resources that you can participate in order to discuss your feelings or spread the message or help other people. So I want to also shout out TMS, the Minerals, Materials and Metals Society, Diversity, Equity and Inclusion Committee, of which I'm a member. TMS has created a working group for the Asian and Pacific Islander community. It is led by Dr. Dong Liu, also known as Lily Liu, from University of Bristol in the UK. We also have members from Los Alamos National Lab, University of Michigan, University of British Columbia, myself, and Sandia National Labs. So if you are going to be attending the TMS meeting in Anaheim, please come up to us and ask us any questions. But also, I guess the message that I want to put across is don't feel alone, because you're not alone.
Thank you, Eliana. I just want to mention, I would recommend going back and watching the panel session that you referred to there. In fact, if anybody has a link to maybe share it in the chat, but yeah, I would recommend going back and watching last year's panel. Does anybody else have any other challenges that they think we need to be highlighting more within the industry, either challenges from a people perspective or from a technology perspective?
I did want to first build off of what Eliana said, which was really important, and to feel that you're not alone. But it was during the time of participating in this panel that Eliana initiated against Asian hate that I realized some really interesting things about the model minority myth and how that drives a wedge between Asians and other underrepresented groups. And I think what I wanted to also convey is that we need to start reaching beyond just Asians or just one, underrepresented group, and really band together and advocate for some of those other groups, especially in the areas of intersectionality, when you belong to more than one of those groups. And I think what came out then was, to me anyway, was the importance of advocacy and allyship in combating DE&I deficiencies. And so I wanted to share a piece of an anecdote that a male colleague once told me. He told me that whenever he's invited to speak on a panel, he asks who else is on the panel to ensure that it has proper representation from other underrepresented groups, which I thought was awesome, because he was in a position of power and influence, being invited to share his experience, and wanted to make sure that representation is there, because representation matters. And so he said, if it does not include any of these groups, he will decline and tell them why, and to ensure that someone else can be represented. So I thought that was a great example of advocacy. And I invite everyone to kind of think about what they each can do in this regard.
I'm aware we only have a couple of minutes left now, so any other points on that question there before we move on to the last one, which I guess kind of ties in actually with what we were just talking about there. Okay, well, Candice, actually, you sort of suggested this final topic, and we're here at Type, organised by Women in 3D Printing, and I think Women in 3D Printing founder Nora really said it best when she said that there's no excuse anymore for not having enough women on conference lineups or in our organisations, and I feel like this conference shows that we're really, getting to a place of achieving that. And of course, we could always do more and do better. And you were interested to hear people's thoughts on what do we do next? Where do we go after this?
Yeah, so I think, this conference, this event is amazing, right? It's full of so many incredible women with different career journeys, different places, different backgrounds, and all of that. And so for me, I think it's important that we don't just stop at women. And tradition, and it builds on what Eliana and Ellen were saying. We've kind of got this thing of sometimes we say we've done it for women, and that kind of ticks the box. We've had some women on a panel, or we've done this. And so I think it's really for all of us to be looking around our companies, our universities, our classrooms, whatever, and saying kind of who's not here that really ought to be here, and what can we do about it? And I think there's probably you can look at it either way, but I think there is good news on it, in that actually we know a lot of the barriers. So I wanted to mention specifically the Leading Roots organization did a wonderful report on the barriers that academia present to Black PhD students. And crucially in that, they had things that we can do about it. How do we address those barriers? We've also got, perhaps again through the social media thing, we've got loads of access to people who have all of this wealth of anecdotal information, people who've lived through being in whatever minority group or with whatever intersectionalities. And so I think it's really the challenge I'd give to everyone actually is probably to go away and just try to, pick something and start there and say, actually, what groups do I not know about, or what barriers am I not aware of? And then perhaps look at those and, very gradually even kind of build up your knowledge of that, and then look around your kind of your nearest workplace, if you like, and say, which of these things can I start to make a difference on now? Which of these things can I be pushing upwards or pushing sideways, and saying this is what we need to do something about? But that's the really key message for me, is not stopping at women and saying, you know, who else is experiencing barriers and what do we need to do to overcome them?
I think that's great advice and something that we can all definitely start doing ourselves. We are kind of at the end of the session now, so I wondered if anybody else has any other comments, and if not, we will close. Okay, great. Well, thank you so much to all of our panelists today. Again, I appreciate for some of you, it was very early today, so it's very much appreciated. And congratulations again on being a finalist for this year's TCT Women in 3D Printing Innovator Award. So just to close out now, you can go to tccawards.com right now and vote for who you think should be this year's winner. And if you want to, you can also join us at the TCT Awards ceremony this year on the 8th of June at the Hilton Birmingham Metropole in Birmingham, UK. So the vote closes on the 23rd of February, so you should start getting those in now and be quick. Please share, please help with promoting all the great people we have on this year's finalist list. And yeah, thanks again so much for attending, and I do hope to see you there at the TCT Awards. So thanks so much again to our finalists, and thank you to Type for having us and letting us present this panel session today. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Thank you, everybody.
Everyone.
I will just share that as well. Not, and we will restart in a moment. Yeah, so here we are. We have them. You can go back to the main stage and join us for a networking session. Just go, if you look on the right of your screen, it will appear. Thank you so much, everyone, for coming, and we'll see you for the next speeches. Thank you. Bye.